Welcome to the Continuous Delivery Podcast. My name is Gerard.
I'm Kino.
And we have a special guest. Today we have Tom Howlett, who is the head of product management at Sonar. It's that tool that every developer forgets they have installed. So let's get right into it, Tom. In our pre discussion, we talked a little bit about over email about this idea of start left. And as agile coaches and people focused on continuous delivery, we always emphasize the importance of shifting left on security, shifting left on requirements, shifting left on code reviews. So help us understand what you mean by start left and how is it different than shift left. Just riff on this idea a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess you know what Sonar is, right? So we do static analysis. We're trying to ensure that your code is clean all the way through. The reason we talk about start left is the earlier you catch the problems, obviously, the less expensive they are, right? So whether security vulnerabilities, whether they're bugs, whether they're maintainability issues, the longer they're in your code base, the more cost there are, the more risk there is. So for us, shift left, I guess we've always been shifting left, but our analyzers work all the way through right into your IDE when you're writing code as well. And we ensure that you can run the same analyzers when you're writing the code as the same that gets run when you're in your CI and your pull request. So yeah, and that obviously the difference in capturing it as you're coding it, just like another linter, is incredibly valuable and puts remediation time to almost zero, right? And you're learning as you're coding as well. As soon as it's in your PR, you've got some delay on the build time. As soon as it's beyond the PR, you've got even longer to kind of remediate. So it is really about getting as much as you possibly can as you're coding, and even before that, right? When you're learning. So we also talk a lot about learn as you code. So we talk about clean as you code, which is as you're cleaning, as you're coding, not later. We talk about learn as you code as well, which is, do you understand the issue you've just created? Not just kind of, okay, here's a quick fix it. You make it the same mistake again tomorrow. Can we actually teach you why that was an issue? Can we help you understand that so that you don't even write the code next? So that's really starting left, or even before starting. It's even when it was in your mind, you didn't create the issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so essentially it's really shortening the feedback loop even more, right? Making sure that you have immediate access to the results and to that learning and to that improvement.
Absolutely. I think, tools like ours can be hugely beneficial, but they can also be a pain, right? I'm as a product manager, I'm interviewing developers every day, and half the developers just love the tool so much. They're like, okay, it gives me this benefit. They really understand the benefit. For some developers you'll talk to, they're like, oh, this thing is a pain, right? It raises these issues. It blocks my PR. I have to go back and have to fix the issues. And and it's almost like a bit of a developer mindset thing. So we just put as much effort as we can into ensuring that's a super smooth process and that you don't break the PR very often, right? And we're looking at features now where we can predict whether your PR is going to break when you're still in the IDE, which I think is where you're really starting to start left even more. So we're working around that now.
So I have a question about, so we're sort of big proponents of test-driven development and the red-green refactor loop. It's something that we find hugely beneficial when developing software. How has Sonar incorporated that loop into your product? Because I've noticed lately when I've been developing, I find myself more and more kind of focusing on the tests more and having Copilot or whoever, insert AI tool sort of actually generate the code based on the tests that I am writing. So okay. I think just personally, my development workflow has changed significantly. And I think AI actually has helped me do more TDD because I almost find writing the actual code tedious, and focusing on the tests actually results in better stuff. So have you, how have you blended the two? Are you a proponent of TDD? How does Sonar encourage TDD? Maybe talk about that.
Yeah, that's a super cool way to think about it. I've not heard that before. So yeah, I started doing TDD, I think in early 2000s, 2003. I was in a company, they were really early to it. It was in London. There was a whole kind of XP movement there. And it was really exciting, and I've always really loved it. As far as Sonar goes, right, so a lot of people really use us to track coverage, and coverage isn't everything, but coverage is a useful indicator, of where you are. And a lot of companies kind of use our coverage baseline. And one thing we do is we can say, even though your coverage might be quite low, right, you might only be on 30%. Any new PR that's created should have 80%, right? So people can set that, so they can have a coverage level which really makes sure people are writing the test. Sure, it doesn't guarantee the quality of the tests, but it guarantees that they're there. And the other thing we do is we have specific rules on test code as well. So we can kind of pick up poor quality tests that might be difficult to maintain, etc. So there's a couple of areas there that we really try to help, and I think we want to do more there. And we're super interested as well in people generating AI generated tests. I think that's going to be a really interesting area. And I mean how people are using the Gen AI stuff for us is really interesting, because you're spending less time writing code. You might be committing code that you don't understand as well as you understood before, right? Because it's been super easy to generate. So the verification step becomes all the more important. And then for us, it's, so how can we help with that? How is the world changing around the Gen AI stuff? But I love that you're writing the tests and then getting Gen AI to write the code. I think that's brilliant. Yeah.
Well, it's you're thinking more about the software than itself, right, and what it needs to do, not just about how to solve it. So you talked about test coverage being kind of one of the things that people use your tools most for. So what's bad about this, or what kind of are the gaps there that that you're using to do about, and what are all the things that you have available that might help them with that?
And maybe as you answer that question, maybe you can take it the next step and say, you also mentioned bad tests. Like, what's a bad test, and how can Sonar tell us you may have coverage, but you have a bad test? Like, double click into that a little bit for us. Like, what's a bad test, and the question about Kino asked about coverage. So
yeah, I mean, the smell that we want to avoid is that people we break people's quality gate. They go back and they go, oh, I've got to get some more code, got to get my code coverage up, and they may even just, now with Copilot, right, you can just go, write me some tests to cover this, right? And who knows what those tests to do. So what's a bad test, right, that may be generated? Firstly, it's test that's just for code coverage. So assert true covers the code, runs, calls the method assert true, right? It's obviously just cheating at this point, and hopefully that would never pass any manual code review. But I think the biggest danger really is brittle tests that you're getting someone to help add coverage to something that isn't really designed to be tested well. And I think, I'm sure you as a TDT proponent understand that this is really about design. This is about writing something that's testing an API in a simple way, that you haven't got too many dependencies in the method, right? You haven't injected 20 different things and that you need to mock out, right? So there's a danger, I think, now to AI code generation that it will do that hard work for you, that before you might have improved the design on, you might have gone, oh gosh, this thing is untestable. The first thing I'm going to do is refactor it and pull it out. Well, I'll write some tests for that first, right? But you're not going to try to test something that's a monolith and has got loads of dependencies, but probably your Gen AI Copilot probably can write a test for that, but it's going to be brittle. It's going to break the next time one of those dependencies change, and that's nothing to do with the code it's testing, right? It's to do with one of the dependencies. So I think there's a couple of smells there that I'd really be wary of. And I think your approach of test first it still goes back to ultimately being the most efficient way to write good code.
Yeah, and how does Sonar right now share this kinds of insights, if it does, with its users?
So, I guess there's a couple of things. One, it's going to raise issues if you write tests that are they're written in a brittle way. There's a number of tests on that. The other thing is if, for example, if you've got a large method with high cognitive complexity in the first place, that you shouldn't be trying to test, right? It's going to have 100 tests to cover it. You need, it's going to tell you to break that down first, right, and break that into something smaller. So yeah, that's where we are.
When is it going to tell you that? Because I find once you create the PR, it's almost a little too late in the game, because there's almost like a sunk fallacy cost. What's that thing? Like, I've already invested so much time in it, I'll just push it through and make it pass. So I feel like we need feedback while you are writing, not after my PR has been run through the pipeline. So how do you get it? How do you get that feedback on localhost?
Yeah. So, I mean, so we have an extension called SonarLint, which if you can then connect it to your SonarCube or your Sonar Cloud instance, right? So SonarCube is the on-premise most people have heard of. Sonar Cloud is a SaaS version of that. Once it's connected, it will download the same analyzer that's going to run in your PR, and it will apply the same quality profile. So if your organization has set a certain profile with certain rules, it will run exactly the same rules for you. So, for example, the cognitive complexity rule, it will run that in the browser, before as you're writing the code. So it doesn't run everything. It runs like 90%. So it can't do things like SQL injection and stuff like that. So, but we're constantly working to bring more and more of the analyzer into the IDE so that it's capturing as many issues as possible, and then putting stuff into to have checks so that it will stop you pushing a PR, right? We haven't not quite there yet, but that's something we're working on now, which I'm really excited about. And when I talk to developers at conferences, they're like, oh, that would kind of save me a lot of pain. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, again, back to the start left that you were talking about earlier on, right? That's exactly what you seem to be doing. Just all of these things that happen after you kind of publish your code or you put it into source code management. Before it even goes there, you try to run those same tests, and whatever you can get locally are the insights that you're providing. That's quite interesting. So, so as you're the head of product management within Sonar, you're doing continuous delivery as well. That's my assumption, at least. And so tell me how. I'm quite curious and quite interesting, especially for an organization like yourself who really understands what that all is about. How that is enabling your business, how you're using it. Do you use it specifically as a technical ability or a technical thing, or is it almost like a business enablement technique? You say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I as we kind of mentioned at the beginning, I'd done some agile coaching before, and I've been trying to help organizations get to this point. And then I turned up at Sonar. I started talking to Sonar. I was like, "Whoa, hold on a minute. This is what I'm trying to help clients do," and they're there. And yeah, it's incredible. On the engineering side, the checks are all the way through. There's great CI. Obviously, Sonar is running in the background. The code review process is great. The whole thing, the code coverage is like often like 85%, stuff like that. 80% isn't enough. They'll kind of keep bumping it up, and then they'll go, can we get to 88? Can we get to 90? And they'll keep shifting it up. But what's the outcome of that for me as a product manager is the really interesting bit. Basically, when they say they're going to release, they release. They'll release without me as a product manager doing any validation or tests sometimes, right? I know we've discussed it. We've kind of looked at it. I don't check it. Right? It just goes out. I really probably shouldn't have said that, but we have some customers where that freaks them out, right? They're like, you trust your process so much, you just let it go. And we do. And the amount of times we roll something back, or the amount of times on SonarCube we release a patch, if you look at SonarCube, there's hardly any patches, right? It just works, and this means that we spend a lot less time fixing things. Everything is much more predictable. We release when we say we're going to release. Often we'll cut branches, right? We won't release as much as we thought. That will be the compromise. But what does get released is always great quality, and that gives me confidence as a product manager that I'm not spending my time going, whoa, hold on a minute, we've got this big bug, we need to kind of deal with that. I just don't deal with that stuff at all. And as a product manager at Sonar, you're kind of encouraged just not to get involved in that side of things, not to get involved in bug backlogs or small change backlogs and things. We leave that to the development team, and we can focus on understanding where the value is for the customer, and we can. That's where the focus is. It's not focused on kind of technical debt and churn and all the other issues. So yeah, it's brilliant from a product management perspective, and as an outcome for the business. Yeah.
So you mentioned there one thing where sometimes you cut branches. So I'm curious to hear, especially for our listeners who might raise a flag and say like, oh, hang on, we're cutting branches. That means that we don't get the scope out. The value that you're delivering. I mean, my assumption is, of course, given how you work and given your background as well, and that most of the value is generated at that point? Or are there still cases where you say like, yeah, you know what, we kind of needed to get this other stuff out, but we just had to delay it to another time? Or how do you see it usually happens?
Yeah, so I guess we write in the kind of the opportunities we write. It's very clear where the core value is for it, and we have really good conversations with the development teams about that. Or okay, this is kind of B bits. These are some bits that are more nice to have, right? So generally, they'll know where they want to cut a branch, and they'll just run it past the product manager and just go, okay, we want to cut a branch here. We'll stick it in the next sprint, or maybe we release for that and see what the feedback is from the customer, whether it's a kind of how valuable the thing we've cut is, because it's the best way to find out, right? Release it and see we have a huge community forum, and if we miss something out that people need, we hear about it very quickly. So yeah, it's a conversation between the development team and the product manager, and those guys. And I think as long as you communicate the value of the feature well and what the core value is and what are the kind of nice to haves around the outside, it's usually down to the development team. They'll kind of know we can cut here, and they'll check with us, right? But they'll generally do it. Occasionally they might say we want to cut this, and we're like, no, think that's a showstopper. Let's extend the release for another sprint. But usually they make a really good call.
I'd love to get into your team structure a little bit, but I do have some product questions in a bit, and we'll come back to the teams. And I know Hino and I are big fans of trunk-based development, so that's why that when you said cut a branch,
okay, yeah,
blood pressure rose really, really quickly there. One thing that I've noticed is that Sonar is really good at analyzing sort of components and giving you sort of coverage breakdowns, potential vulnerabilities. And again, all the sort of the Gen AI stuff is really at the unit level, where it's generating a lot of code. You tell it, I want to develop a function that does, and it comes back with, hey, here you go. What is sort of the roadmap here? Is it how can Sonar basically help us find bugs across integration boundaries? Because right now, most bugs happen at the seams. They don't happen really at the unit level. Of course, there are, but a lot of the major ones happen when system A can't talk to system B properly, and you have an issue there. In your maybe not current state or future state, what are your thoughts about Sonar as a product, sort of using maybe AI, trying to predict where bugs across integration boundaries can happen? What's the plan there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you say, the sort of code level, the line level issues, I mean, we do go beyond that. We go to the function level and maybe to the component level. But yeah, the integration issues we don't tend to deal with static analysis. But I completely agree with you. I think the structural issues and the kind of the integration issues are a big part of that. And you can't do everything in static analysis there. You need to be perhaps doing some integration tests and things like that. But there is a certain amount you can do. And I think one of the key areas that we're starting to focus on now, and we're starting to look at, is structural analysis, going broader, so going outside the component level and how components are structured, and where there might be cyclic dependencies coming between those components and things like that, and they could cause all sorts of maintenance issues going forward. So this is definitely an area we want to get into. We want to just capture as much as we can in static analysis because it's the most efficient way to do it. And yeah, the structural issues are something that we're now starting to look at, and there'll be some announcements around this coming soon.
Okay, nice. I'm really looking forward to that because anything that tells us, hey man, you wrote something here and you just increase your network hops by 4, something like that would be really, really valuable. So one thing that when we are at organizations, one thing that always sort of seems to delay things is security analysis. And as much as we talk about shift left and getting tools into the pipeline, there always seems to be, like, at the end of before release, especially if you're working in sort of kind of like high risk, like financial stuff, there's always kind of like a phase, I want to say, dedicated to penetration testing, where you have somebody outside coming in and hammering the app using the public endpoints, the surface areas that are exposed, and you come up with like a report or whatever. How far are we from eliminating that step entirely and relying on static analysis to tell us what our sort of exposure is from an endpoint point of view? Do you see static analysis ever being enough to, at the end of the day, kind of just say goodbye to your application is deployed and somebody's hammering it?
I mean, quite whether we get to the point where the pen test isn't required, I don't know, right? But we're constantly broadening the scope of what we're analyzing. So obviously, you would expect the SQL injection, in the main application code, but we're now also increasingly analyzing the infrastructure files as well. So infrastructure as code has been a big piece for us, and that's mostly around security analysis, to be honest. So is the configuration secure is a huge area for us, and I think that's one of the things where we'll start to catch earlier some of those things that are caught at penetration test levels. So that's kind of one area with that. I mean, how the role AI plays in that, I don't yet know, to be honest. Yeah, that's not an area we've kind of.
You should ask AI.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at, especially when you're looking at things like security and so forth, but also about other things. So how important is batch size in that story? Basically the change size.
Yeah, so you're talking about the batch size. So Sonar has an interesting. I'm going back to the Sonar development process, and I'm obviously not one of the developers, but I kind of work closely with the guys. So they don't, for a start, they run sprints which isn't like a sprint where they bundle loads of stuff in. They completely they kind of came up with their own agile way of working, to be honest, which is not like Scrum, even though they use some similar words. They basically have
just so you know.
Yeah. They create a minimal piece that they want to release, okay? And they will basically, usually 2, maybe 3 developers will work on that as a single batch and get that to release as soon as it's ready. So it won't be part of a larger sprint with a batch size where you're waiting for the end of the sprint to release. They'll kind of, they get their batch size as small as possible. Yeah. Yep. And I get that we talked about branching before. They will create a feature branch for that, and they will merge in. They don't do trunk-based development. But for them, it kind of works, I think. And they manage to get very high quality there, and it kind of allows them to run multiple features, at the same time, kind of thing, and scale out on quite large code bases.
Yeah. So based on what I'm hearing there, then those features are fairly small because there's multiple of those that are typically developed within the sprints time frame, right? Sprint would be about 2 weeks. Is that what you said? Did I hear you say?
No, it can be shorter, right? So it'll be as short as they can make it, right? And it may well be 2 weeks. It's probably more like 1 week, or maybe even sometimes less than 1 week. So their sprint will just be how long it takes for that feature from coding to release, and that allows us to get the feedback on it as quickly as possible and work that way. So that's how they're kind of reducing batch sizes. Yeah.
So it's more like a flow-based approach, more so than an iteration-based approach.
Yeah. I mean, they still do. They still have a cadence for planning, usually weekly. I think some do fortnightly kind of thing, where they'll plan out, but they'll plan multiple sprints within that kind of that period. So yeah.
Okay. Nice.
So maybe perhaps we can talk a little bit about just internally Sonar's team structure. It's one of the topics that people find interesting, is because everybody's organized their teams differently. So just talk us about the composition of a team. And you sort of touched on that a product manager basically stays at the requirements level and doesn't really dive into the nitty gritty. But maybe talk a little bit about what the actual team composition is. Do you have a QA role in there? Do you have a business analyst? Talk us through what a Sonar team looks like.
This won't take long. So when I joined 3 years ago, every team was a team of developers, nothing else as developers. So and they were incredibly self-organizing. So there would be a team of 5 to 8 developers generally. They would rotate roles around doing kind of the thing. How they worked, they would decide really autonomously how they wanted to work. This became kind of a bit painful as we scaled out, right? Because you've got so many different teams. If you want to talk to that team, you have to think about that. They release this way, So we've recently brought in engineering managers who are kind of helping to standardize the structure without kind of getting in the way of productivity. So now basically it's developers and with engineering managers, often 1 per squad. Not quite there yet. There's no testers, no kind of manual testing done at all. It's automated testing, and it goes out and it doesn't break, right? There's literally none. And we have UXers, so on anything that's front end facing, there'll be often a UX design and UX research in that squad as well. So that's something that we bought. Originally Sonar was really built by developers for developers purely. There's a sort of limitation to how good you can get without those specialist skills. So increasingly now there's also UX on the team and PMs and a PM. But the PM, as you say, doesn't get involved in the day-to-day at all. We're mostly out talking to customers, doing research, coming back with really well qualified features that are well prioritized. That's our job, to maximize the value coming in.
So before we head to the closing question that Tino has, I do want to sort of get your opinion on. There's sort of this myth that we often deal with in large companies, and it's this idea that once the developers are done, we need somebody else to verify what they do, and we have a QA process on top of it. And as agile coaches, we always try to shift left and say, okay, if QA has an opinion, talk to the developers before they even commit the code and let that collaboration happen there. Like, what is your response or advice to organizations who view quality as a two-step process where you have development and QA? What are they seeing that you're not seeing, or vice versa? Just riff on that a little bit.
I think it's really about empowerment of the developer, right? If you disempower the developer, then they don't take responsibility for the quality, and therefore you need a tester to verify that they're doing a good enough job. And you have this awful cycle of kind of, I'd create something that's half done and then test, because I know the tester will come back anyway. And I've seen some good teams with some good test and developer relationships, but at Sonar, I prefer it the best without that situation at all, and the developer taking full responsibility for what they do. And because they don't feel disempowered by managers, they kind of take that on board themselves. So it's more of a cultural thing, which I think as agile coaches we kind of knew all along, right? This is a cultural piece, not a capability piece, and there's no extra skills kind of required there at all, apart from good automated testing and really good quality code, and being given the time and not being kind of pressurized into releasing fixed scope, fixed time stuff. That obviously deteriorates quality, and then you need testers to go and check the quality. So yeah, I think for me that's the key. It's around empowerment of the developer.
Yeah. So then I come with my concluding question here. So it sounds like it sounds like you're having a good time. It sounds like you have a fantastic team to work with. I think that many people would like to be in your position where time to market is not an issue, when you don't necessarily need to be involved with the quality because that's been taken care of and people take their responsibility, their teams take their responsibility, those kinds of things. So it sounds like you're having a good time. What if other product managers want to kind of be in the same position and they don't have it today? What would you recommend they start with?
I'm hiring. So, I think it is about organizational culture, right? And as a product manager, putting trust in your team, making sure you have a good team that feel empowered, that are capable. Listen to the team, listen to the development team. What's you really understand what they're doing. I think it really helps, having been a developer myself, to really understand those things. And I think, for me, going into any kind of role where you're working with a development team, if you come from a development team, a developer background, you've got a huge advantage there. So I would get to know how the developers work, really understand the developer workflow, understand what the cost is of kind of poor quality, because it shouldn't be an issue, and you've got to make the time and space for quality. But it's also about having an organization that isn't necessary, that also understands those trade-offs, to pushing too hard, I think. So yeah, find the right organization, understand your development team, trust the development team, and kind of, but I mean, I don't also challenge them too, right? I think it's not just about trust. You also need to challenge, and when things aren't going well, you kind of raise it up. But yeah, I think,
Yeah, I know this. We said this is our last question, but I do want to just one follow-up point on this answer is how much do you stress on your product managers the importance of metrics? Because I know, especially in consumer-facing applications, metrics are king. The active users, all that stuff. Can you share maybe a couple of metrics, 2 or 3 metrics that you hold your product managers maybe not accountable to, but emphasize the importance of?
Okay. This is really complex, and I think just coming up with a couple is hard. And so, as I said, Sonar was originally by developers for developers. They didn't measure much, to be right honest, because they knew the developers developing it knew intuitively what was going to be valuable and what wasn't. Mm-hmm. As we came as a product managers, we're like, okay, it's not that simple. Different organizations work differently. We need to measure more things. I think the key here is to have a kind of metric framework, not kind of over prioritize any single metrics, right? Really understand how they can get played, how they can think. So you're not using them as targets, you're using them for insight, right? So, and then kind of layer them in a sense, right? So you're developing a new feature. Okay, what's the outcome we're trying to get from this feature? How can we get indications of that outcome? Sometimes we can measure it through telemetry. Sometimes it's like usage. Sometimes we use tools where behavioral analytics tools. So we watch how people use the tools. That's really valuable. Sometimes it's qualitative. Sometimes we'll put a little pop-up survey, how's this going? What would you do with this? So you've got to don't just think about telemetry, think really broad. And it's all about how are we going to prove that we achieved the outcome we wanted from this, and come up with that outcome first, and pre-plan how you're going to measure the outcome, I think is it, and not just be tied to a few metrics, but really be quite creative about it. But then have some higher level KPIs as well, which we know if they're going in the right direction, we're doing the right thing. So yeah.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, it's hard. It must be hard to be a product manager of a team where the customer is the developer.
Yeah. I mean, if you like working with developers, it's the best job in the world, right? Because you're both on both sides of the of the coin. But yeah, it's good.
Okay, Tom, thank you so much for your time. We thoroughly enjoyed it, and hopefully have you back at some point in the future on the podcast. Thanks again for joining us.
Great, me too. Yeah, it was a great conversation. Thank you.